What's up, everybody? I want to talk about my thoughts on the new cards that are going to be released during this month, during the Rise of the Phoenix season. We got some good cards in here, so I'm going to give my thoughts on what I think about them just by looking at them, as well as if I think they're worth trying to chase after to obtain. Okay, now we're going to have an update coming very soon that will allow us to get cards either through the same way of buying them with collector's tokens in the token shop or opening spotlight caches when the cards we want are featured in them. Okay, so I'll give my thoughts on these cards and whether I think they're worth chasing after with those tokens or by opening your spotlight caches when that card's in there. And let's get into it. Now, the first card being released is Jean Grey. She is a 3/3 with the ongoing ability that players must play their first card here each turn if possible. So that applies to both you and your opponent when you play this card. She's coming out on July 11th, depending on your time zone. That may vary by day. And she's being inserted directly into Series 5. So she will be at that full 6,000 tokens cost upon release. But then again, she will be in the first spotlight caches that we see in the game alongside Living Tribunal and Null. And she has a lot of hype behind her for obvious reasons. I mean, first of all, she's got a good stat line. Okay, any card that costs 3 or less, that's just a big advantage. It means you can play that card in the first half of the game. On turn 6, you can play it alongside another card of equal value, and it's just really flexible. Cards that cost 3 or less, you can just put in a bunch of different decks and you don't have to build a whole deck around them like you would most 5 or 6 cost cards. So my thoughts are that she's very strong. I mean, she's making decisions for your opponent. And people hate that, okay? People don't like when the location eagle pops up and he makes you play your cards and he does it for you, right? You don't want that. Even Dr. Octopus can ruin someone's day. If you play Dr. Octopus and you pull all of your opponent's combo cards in the wrong order, it can really mess things up. And Jean Grey does that. Okay, I believe out of this set of cards coming out this month, she will be the most meta-defining. She'll be the most impactful. Last month, that was Spider-Ham. This month, I believe it will be Jean Grey. And this is really strong against these big power or ramp decks. Okay, a deck like Shuri, where turn 4, you play Shuri, turn 5, Red Skull, turn 6, Taskmaster on a different lane. This is going to be a good card against that. Okay, your opponent can no longer Red Skull in one lane, Taskmaster in another if you had Jean Grey down. And against an Electro ramp deck, I mean, if your opponent played Electro, they can only play one card a turn. And they have to play it on Jean Grey's lane. That is very strong. Not to mention the synergy that she would have with Mojo or the Guardians of the Galaxy cards. Okay, if you're playing Gamora, you know where your opponent is playing a card on turn 5 because they have to play at least one in Jean Grey's lane. So she is very powerful. She is a 3-drop. That means you can put her in a Surfer deck. And that 3/3 stat line is really killer. I mean, we see Cosmo, Juggernaut, Killmonger, they're all 3/3s. So my final verdict is yes, Jean Grey is definitely worth chasing after. Again, I think she's going to be meta defining. She's going to create a lot of new decks and styles. Some decks you can just put her in. Some decks you might adjust to have more of that style of focusing on where your opponent is playing. And you're going to need to know how to play against her because I expect to see her a lot. The next card being released is Echo. Echo is a 1-cost, 2-power card with the ability that after your opponent plays an ongoing card here, remove its abilities. Now, she is coming out on July 18th, also being entered into Series 5, so she will be 6,000 tokens. And this is a weird ability. I mean, you have to essentially predict where your opponent is about to play an ongoing card. Now, if you're against a full ongoing deck, you can wait until you see your opponent to start play something, and then you play Echo, knowing they're going to play more there. But it's just a hard thing to do. I mean, how are you going to predict that, right? It's like trying to stop Cosmo, but you need to lay it down knowing where your opponent is going to play Cosmo. It's tough. Okay, that level of prediction is tough. Some decks have very little or even no ongoing cards, and against those decks, Echo is just a whiff, right? But that's fine. That's tech cards. Like Shang-Chi sometimes doesn't do anything. But when your opponent does play a card that has 9 or more power, you see where it is, and then you play Shang-Chi on top. Okay, you don't preemptively play Shang-Chi. Echo, you have to preemptively play, and that's tough. Okay, she's just a 1-cost card, and a 1-cost card that's a tech card with big counter potential can be very strong. But again, I think it's just going to be too hard. It's too niche. Even if you do predict where your opponent's going to play something, it just doesn't guarantee. It just doesn't guarantee that they're going to play an ongoing card at that turn. So I think if ongoing decks ever get extremely popular in the meta, Echo could see some play. But my verdict is Echo is a bit of a miss. Okay, especially being 6,000 tokens. I don't think she's worth 6,000 tokens. Okay, you should save those tokens for Jean Grey or for a different card. If you get Echo, that's great. We'll have to see how she gets used, but I don't think we're going to see her that much. Next up, we've got Legion. Legion is a 5-cost, 7-powered card with the on-reveal ability to replace each other location with the location that he is played on. Now, he is being released on July 25th directly into Series 4. Okay, skipping Series 5, going straight to Series 4, so he will only cost 3,000 tokens. And my initial thoughts on him is that it's kind of niche and hard to really justify. Okay, and the reason being is that you're going to essentially leave it up to whatever locations the game spawns for you and hope that you can find one that for whatever reason you want to duplicate because your deck can take advantage of it. But there's no real way to plan for what he will duplicate. Okay, an initial thought is that, he would be great paired with Storm, but presumably he will not work with Storm. When Storm starts flooding a lane, it needs to be flooding for an entire turn until it becomes flooded the following turn. Okay, you play Storm on turn 3, it starts flooding on turn 3, for the entirety of turn 4 it's flooding, and then on turn 5 it's flooded. So if Legion copies Storm's flooding location on turn 5, on turn 6 it's still flooding. Okay, the locations will not be flooded. So unless Second Dinner decides to change how Storm's flooding location works and how it works when other locations copy it up until this point, Legion really has no way for you to plan ahead of time what he will copy, and so it's really random. There's a card like Quake, which doesn't see much play, but Quake is only a 2-cost card, okay? That's much easier to justify than a 5-cost card that's going to be basing his gameplay around these locations that you're not planning for. And another thing is, I believe when he was first announced, he was announced as a 5-6. Now he's a 5-7. That's usually a bad sign. The fact that Second Dinner made this change before release tells me that their internal playtesting was not going so great with Legion. Okay, they've done this before with their weaker cards when they first announce it, and when they actually release it, they'll have 1 or 2 more points in power when released. And they've done the opposite for strong cards, that they first announce it as higher power, and then they bring it down on release because they realized during testing that it was just too good. So I think that was a sign for Legion, but again, a 5-cost card, you really need to have something good and fairly consistent. Okay, if it's not consistent, it better be this huge miraculous combo. I don't think Legion does that. Okay, I think most games you play, you will not have a great opportunity for him. You're not going to have locations that when you change them to one of the locations already on the board, it's all of a sudden just going to win you the game and throw your opponent off. And again, it doesn't happen until turn 5, so that's really just turn 6 when the locations are different. You're changing 1 turn for your opponent. I don't think it's worth it. So I'm definitely giving him a thumbs down. I think he's probably down there with Echo in terms of viability. Even though he's going straight into Series 4, which is only 3,000 tokens, that's pretty good, right? 3,000. I just don't think he's worth it. I think we're going to have to wait around and see what decks people come up with, because I got no ideas. Lastly, we've got Mirage. Now, Mirage is actually coming out in August, but is still the Rise of the Phoenix season. Mirage is a 2-cost, 2-powered card with the on reveal ability to copy the lowest cost card in your opponent's hand, but give it an additional +2 power when it comes to your hand. Mirage is also being released directly into Series 4 and will cost 3,000 tokens. That's pretty awesome. And she's a 2-cost card, which again just means she's nice and flexible. You don't have to build a deck around her. You can put her into some existing decks. I don't think she's as meta-defining as Jean Grey, but she's got a pretty good ability. I mean, this is almost power creep, direct to obvious power creep on Cable. Cable is a 2/2 that will take the bottom card of your opponent's deck. Mirage does not take a card, she copies a card, so your opponent does not lose any card in their hand or deck, but Mirage is also giving it +2 power. Okay, so she's generating a card for you, just like Cable. She's giving you information on what's in your opponent's deck or hand, just like Cable. But unlike Cable, she's giving it +2 power. Now it is the lowest cost card, so you're presumably not going to get something too big and strong, but that does mean you can hopefully fit it into one of your future turns. I think that's a pretty good ability. Okay, against every deck it's not going to work, but copying something, giving it +2 power, that's pretty nice. Okay, even if you just hit Angela or Bishop, you could pair Mirage with a card like Quinjet and get a discount on the card you copy as long as it's not a 1-cost card. I think Mirage is pretty good. Again, I don't think it's game breaking. I don't think it's meta defining. I think we'll see her a decent amount, but not too much. But it's just good card generation with a boost in power. Yeah, it's random. You don't know what you're getting. But I think she's so cheap at 2 costs. She also won't be killed by Killmonger. She's got a great cost for her ability, and I think she's pretty good. So I'm giving Mirage the thumbs up as well. And the icing on the cake again is that she is only 3,000 tokens. So as a quick recap, these are my thoughts on these new cards coming out this season. Jean Grey and Mirage are both worth chasing after, especially Jean Grey. I think she could really be meta defining. Mirage is pretty good, and at only 3,000 tokens might be worth a shot here chasing after, even though I don't think she's going to change the game entirely. I think Echo being at 5,000 tokens and Legion even being at 3,000 tokens upon release, I think they're just too weak. They're niche and they're not super reliable. I think you're going to have a lot of games where they just kind of do nothing, and they don't have a stat line to justify doing nothing. So those are my thoughts. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys predict the new cards will be like, how strong they will be, if I'm completely underestimating or overestimating any of these cards, and I'll see you next time.